Well, let's find out by speaking to Lord Robert Hayward, who's a Conservative peer and a brilliant pollster as well. Lord Hayward, great to have you on the programme. It seems to me that when it comes to the movements, let's say, across the West that have given Trump a second term in power, that is seeing the AfD surge in Germany, Rassemblement in France, Giorgia Meloni in Italy, the PVV in the Netherlands. I mean, wherever you look across the West, it seems to me that the general public are fed up with their speech being shackled in thought crimes. They're fed up with uncontrolled borders, and yet it seems to me this government haven't really got that memo.
Can I digress completely before I answer your question?
Of course.
Just to give you some wonderfully useless piece of information, and that is that Marmite is the product or the leftover product after brewing beer.
Right.
And they found a bit way of using it, and that's where Marmite comes from.
I knew that. And this is, the British are very good at recycling things. I bet, is it a northern product? I'd imagine it was some sort of, you know, sour-faced man in Yorkshire who came up with that concept.
Burton-on-Trent was the home of brewing and the biggest centre, if you go back a few decades.
To a Londoner, that's the north.
Where it comes from. So that was the digression.
I loved it.
Coming back to your question, what we've actually seen across the whole of Western democracies, or the vast majority, is not only what's been identified as a shift to the right, but also a very, very strong anti-incumbency process in general elections. So we've seen the Conservatives turned out of power here. You've seen the position change in the Netherlands, etc. One or two exceptions. But overwhelmingly, it's anti-incumbency that what one's seeing. Immigration is one of those factors. You referred to hate crimes and the like as well. Those are things that come up when you do polling as issues below the main one, which is the economy.
Well, they're not really doing a good job of that either, one could argue. Interesting, the growth statistics out today, if you could call it growth, I feel like Rachel Reeves' budget was like reverse Viagra for the economy. You look at it, and of course, you know, the governor of the Bank of England's going, oh, it must be Brexit and friction and all the rest of it. And I'm like, well, it's actually not so much Brexit itself of what we have or haven't done with it, sunshine. But, you know, the mood music going up to that budget was scaring the living daylights out of any company wanting to invest. All we heard were tough choices, broad shoulders, it's going to be difficult, 22 billion black hole. Anyone thinking, right, I'm going to employ some more people, build some more factories, invest a bit in the United Kingdom, is going places, would have heard the rhetoric coming out of number 10 and number 11 and been scared witless. And they wonder why there's no growth. Very good story, caught my eye. You're going to love this one, by the way. Let me just read this one out. So Guido was watching Rachel Reeves' Mansion House speech last night, and the fact that she was an economist, apparently, when she was in the Bank of England only. Before entering politics, I was an economist at the Bank of England and then in financial services. But she's also done some retrospective digital editing of her CV on LinkedIn. So before, she said she was an economist at the Bank of Scotland full-time and an economist at Halifax full-time. Well, now apparently she's changed it to what it really was, which was retail banking, which managed administration processes, IT matters, small projects and planning. There you go. She wasn't an economist at all.
Well, what's interesting about her comments in relation to the GDP figures today is that she said she's not satisfied, but she's moved away from blaming the previous government. Up until this week, every time there was an economic question, it was the Conservatives' fault, it was the black hole, whatever size it might happen to be. But we're now moving on, and it's no longer realistic for the Chancellor or the new government to say, well, it's all the Conservatives' fault. Because what is striking, and I'm not a fan of Trump's, I'm a Republican supporter, but not a fan of Trump's. But what is striking about Donald Trump's election is that the moment he's got elected, the stock exchange, all the economists, the levels of investment have let rip. They're really moving rapidly. Whereas you put your finger on it, over here, the business community has been scared utterly witless They've been told that they're going to be hit with taxes. No economist, and by the way, I'm an economics honours graduate, but I wouldn't claim to be an economist. No economist is saying the messaging is good news for industry. They're saying there could be more tax rises on the way. And unfortunately, you see the contrast between what's happened in the United States and what is now happening in Britain.
Right, and you know, it's interesting. The knee-jerk reaction of this government, and one assumes Andrew Bailey as well, is to say, well, we need to actually have a closer working and trading relationship with the EU, which, of course, when it comes to the EU, we all know involves being told a whole load of rules and regulations you must live by in order to have that frictionless trade. And yet when I look at the economies of Europe, the malaise of the economies of Europe, Germany, once upon a time the manufacturing powerhouse, is in an absolute mess. They barely even have a government. All the political upheaval that's happened there. The only economies that seem to be actually growing are those with proper right-wing governments like Italy under Giorgia Meloni. Should our instinct be, seeing how much the economy has shown an uptick in America just on the announcements that he's going to be back in the White House, be thinking, do you know what? We won't be able to have a good trade deal with America if we continue to get ever closer and get tangled up within the sort of regulatory orbit of the EU. And that's what we should go for as our bigging trade partner, or go, uh-oh, protectionism's coming down the tracks in America. We're going to have a punitive relationship with them. We better actually create a buffer for ourselves by working hand in glove with our European neighbours.
I challenge what you said generally at the start, in that while there are certain economies that are doing better, and Italy is one, Spain is another, and you also suggested directly that if you have a better relationship with the EU, it has to involve regulation. Well, it shouldn't have to. There's no reason why a country outside the EU can't have better relations without having regulation. If the EU insists on regulation, then so be it, and you walk away and say, no, we're going to go our way. We will look at places around the world and get into deals with them, whether that's the United States or wherever it may happen to be. There's no question there are opportunities around in all sorts of different ways. And Germany, whose stock exchange, by the way, has done better than Britain's this year over the last 12 months, France has done worse. But Germany is now facing a crisis of its own, because it has a general election pending. And what's happening at the moment is that Germany is on hold, and has been ever since the Russians invaded Ukraine. They've been in serious difficulties, and they are now facing the reality of not only EU regulation, but the difficulties they face from their eastern borders. And the announcement that Volkswagen and the like are shutting factories comes as inevitably as a result of over-regulation, but also the difficulties that they face to the east, not purely Russia, but also China.
One of the big issues that's affected Europe, we see the Schengen acquis essentially being torn up, countries wanting to reinstate national borders, populist parties soaring in the polls, and that sense that actually the nation-state is the best unit of democracy, that's all coming back into vogue. We were ahead of our time as Brexiteers. We kind of were the first domino to be pushed in this sequence of events. We now see Donald Trump really talking tough on irregular migration, I think is the politically correct term, over in America. Do you think actually that there'll be something significant that happens as a result of Donald Trump being back in the White House if he takes tough action on his own borders that might give, even though it might be against their instincts, but might give Sir Keir Starmer a bit of political cover to do things that the previous Conservative governments weren't able to do?
Now, I think the cover, and I do think he will get cover, but the cover, ironically enough, will come from the EU. Because all the EU countries are facing migration problems, whether it be Italy or Germany or France, Spain. And what they are trying to do is pursue policies, some of which are remarkably similar to the one that Rishi was forcing through and has been dropped immediately after the election by the Labour Party. So immigration is an international issue, and the EU is trying to tackle it. They're failing. But I think if the cover comes, it will come from the EU, because they will adopt remarkably similar policies to what we were in the process of doing and should still be trying to do.
Well,
I would add one other thing, sorry, if I can. we have two categories of immigration. One is legal migration, and the other is illegal migration, whatever you choose to call it. The illegal migration is the one that gets all the attention because you can show pictures of boats. James Cleverly cut the rights in terms of the numbers of people that could come into the country. We've begun to see that change because people who were doing PhDs and MAs and the like were allowed to bring their families. And James Cleverly, when he was Home Secretary, abolished that process. To reduce migration, not only do you have to stabilise the world in terms of the world order, but also you need to toughen up on legal migration as well as illegal migration.
Yeah, indeed you do. The numbers are eye-watering. Lord Robert Hayward, thank you ever so much.